in the parts that we're not as strong in. So I think that the FAC has been given very clear directions because we wanted them to, like we were talking about earlier, study the reserves. We wanted to have them dive into the pension plans. We wanted them to do inventory and capital asset inventories and infrastructure inventory, and seeing the big picture, seeing what our budget needs will be in 5 years, and maybe not so far as 10 years because anything could change. A lot of things could change, but we gave them a lot of directions, and so far I think they've been performing really well. I think there needs to be more dialogue happening between the FAC and the council and the city staff. Right now, the FAC, I'm told to stop.
Finish the sentence. It's okay.
I think the FAC is heading towards the right direction. I think there could be some improvements as far as the collaboration, but I'm pretty happy with the results so far.
Thank you. Victoria?
So when I became treasurer, this was another thing I was surprised to find when I was elected, and I said, where's the finance committee? And then I discovered there was no finance committee. I couldn't believe it. And so I think the response I got from the city council was, well, we're the finance committee, which, 3 lawyers and a doctor and a real estate agent, to me, didn't scream finance committee. So we went around in circles for a while, got a finance committee formed, and I do feel that the city council initially supported that. I think they didn't. They didn't want a citizens group being the finance committee. But then I think we had 33 great candidates that we interviewed, and I think they kind of got on board. But then where it went off was I think the city staff really put up the roadblocks for the finance committee. And then all of a sudden the city council didn't support it. And then this thing's been at loggerheads for months. It's frustrating, I think, to the committee because they can't get work done. They're people, all corporate people, used to working and getting things done. Sorry, Renata.
Mr. Kemps?
We have wonderful citizens that have joined that finance committee, and when I first got involved, I was curious, and so I explored and met with 3 of them. And I can share with you that they're so frustrated and they feel completely and totally handcuffed. And they're desperately trying to help and trying to analyze and trying to make a difference. And they feel that the city manager and the council are not giving them and enabling them with the power to actually contribute and support. I've heard stories about those that are on the FAC trying to actually collaborate with staff and sit down with them and actually assist them when they're challenged with time to work through issues. And that's been refused. So it feels like it's been a constant tug of war, and I'd love to see it resolved, and I'd love to contribute to that.
Ms. King?
We did form the Finance Advisory Committee about a year ago. We've got some great people on it. We didn't really have a model for it. We had some direction in terms of what the City Council wanted them to accomplish, but we didn't have a model for this committee. And so there definitely was some push and pull in terms of how they would work. What's been happening is that they want to do the source work. They want to create their own work product. That works very unlike any of our other committees where the staff creates the work and the advisory committee actually reviews it. So this was an entirely new model for the committee, for the staff, and for the city council. But we've worked over the months, and now I think we do have the committee has a very good working relationship with our finance director. We have gotten into the routine where, in fact, the committee is creating their own work product, and then staff is reviewing it. So it's a little different than any committee that we have, but we've had to accommodate that. And I think that's maybe some of the tension that the questioner was asking about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McGowan?
Well, as a member of the Finance Advisory Committee, I can speak firsthand about it. My biggest problem is a lack of urgency, a lack of a sense of urgency. All 5 of us think the same way on the committee. I will tell you they're great people, and we have seen with our fiscal vision that we are hitting some crossroads, and we want to make accelerated analysis done so that we can make decisions to begin to save and put money away and spend appropriately today because we see something coming in the horizon. We've got a long-range financial model we began to roll out to our committee at the last meeting. We hope to do it again on the 26th of February with the full city council, and it's going to share an ability to test sensitivities and to look at those competing alternatives. Do we fund down or pay down some of the unaccrued liability, or do we put money into the capital improvement fund for infrastructure needs or some other option? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
Hey, so I can tell you that I look to the FAC for a great resource for me. Like my colleagues, I've met with several members of the FAC, and they all admit that there were struggles in the beginning of that process. I also sit on the Traffic Safety Committee, and quarterly we meet with the mayor with all the committees, and we all give updates. We had a meeting, I think it was just last week, and the FAC was present. They provided an update. They were very positive, and they talked about a 5- and 10-year projection for our budget that they expect to come out, I think, at the end of the month, actually, for City Council. So I think it's a great resource. I think it was great putting that committee together. And with anything that you start, there's always struggles at the beginning. There's bumps in the road, and at the end of the day, they all get worked out. And so I think it's a valuable committee, and I'm looking forward to hearing what their projections are.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we begin now with Victoria. Ms. Losey, the next question, one more finance question. Do you consider the PVE annual budget to be balanced when it annually underpays the CalPERS obligation and borrows additional funds from the city reserves?
Oh, boy, that's a big one. Okay. So it's balanced. This is a hard one. So the city budget is balanced on an operating basis for the money that comes in. We spend the money, but we have to take from reserves when we want to contribute to infrastructure spending. Something's buzzing. Are you guys hearing? Oh, is that your? I'm sorry, that's Betty's watch buzzing away. Oh, it's your phone? No? Okay, sorry, so sorry. So do I consider the budget balanced? I think we have an operating, we balance, the general fund is balanced. That's like our checking account. So we put the money in, we spend money, but when we run out of money in the general fund, we have to take from our reserve funds to pay for things like infrastructure, capital spending, other funds for equipment replacement. So from that perspective, we take out of our savings to put into our checking account. So I don't call that balanced at the end of the day.
Mr. Camps.
2 issues in addition to what Victoria just said. If you think about your home life, you have a checking account and a savings account, and when one gets drained and one runs out, and you're transferring back and forth to Rob, Peter versus Paul, is that a balanced budget? No. On top of it, we have accruing long-term pension liabilities, which in fact turns into debt. We're not paying it off every year. It's growing at a rate of over 7%, and we do not have a balanced budget.
Ms. King.
Government accounting is very tricky. It's based on fund accounting. So yes, we do have a balanced operating budget every year. We don't take money from reserves to pay for other things. We take them from accounts that are earmarked for that particular purpose. So if we're doing a sewer project, we take it from the sewer fund. Those funds can't be used for anything else except that project. If we're doing a capital project, we take it from the capital fund. If we're replacing equipment, we take it from the equipment replacement fund. So we're not taking it from reserves. The reserves that we were talking about earlier are a completely separate fund, and the only time that we have had to go into reserves is the year that Measure D failed. And at that point, even though we lost $5 million, we only took $1.2 million from our reserves. In terms of our pension liability, again, that liability is growing at an exponential rate, thanks in large part to CalPERS that has taken their investment losses and foisted them on all their member cities. Again, I'm hoping that we can, in our next budget, allocate some money to pay down that unfunded liability.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan.
I'm not going to repeat what everyone else has just said about the balanced budget, but I will just cite a couple of statistics for you. Our overall fund balances, all the assets of the city has declined 25% in the last 6 years. What concerns me the most is that we are not generating enough surpluses in our operating fund in order to properly fund our capital improvement reserve fund. Our capital reserve fund is projected to be at $1.7 million 5 months from today, at the end of June 30th. We spend $2.5 to $3 million annually on maintenance and capital improvements out of that fund. We don't have enough resources where our revenues and exceed our expenses in order to properly fund that or do any type of pay down on unaccrued liabilities.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
Yes, for intent and purposes of this budget, I believe the budget is balanced. But there's some concerns with the current budget balance. We only pay the minimum into our pension deficit. We didn't put any funds towards the capital improvements, and there are no funds towards equipment and replacement. So, although this budget appears balanced to me, going forward, I think we're going to have some issues, like my colleague said, because we're not filling those other terms.
Okay, going on to a more personal question, if you will.
I don't think Betty answered.
Betty got.
Oh, I'm sorry, Betty, sorry.
It's okay. So as far as the balanced budget, as long as we're making more revenue than we're expensing, we're considered balanced. But however, it is true that we don't have as much money to put into our infrastructure improvements. We don't have enough money to look forward in the long term. I think those are very important things to consider. As long as we can pay for our daily operations, to me, it's not robbing Peter to pay Paul, because at the end of the day, those are all still city's money. Having a long-term projection, like I said, is still important. The only time we actually tapped money out of the reserves was when we lost Measure D. And luckily we had Measure E, or else we would have lost another $5 million and another $5 million. So it's good that we have 50% for a rainy day like that. But as far as the balance is concerned in governmental accounting, we are balanced.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Kemps, this is a question. Did any of you grow up in Palos Verdes Estates, and what does that mean to you?
I'm sorry, ask the question again.
Did any of you grow up in Palos Verdes Estates, and what does that mean to you, if you did, I guess?
Any of you. I didn't hear the first part. I apologize. I grew up in Rancho Palos Verdes.
It's okay, I'm from there.
I didn't mean it as an elitist answer. Sorry. I love both cities, so respectfully, there it is. I grew up in Rancho Palos Verdes, went through all schools. Absolutely love our cities. I've actually spent most of my adult life with my family in Palos Verdes Estates, so nothing against RPV. I absolutely love it, and I love our nature and everything else that goes with it. As a child, I didn't fully appreciate it. I got to go to Malaga Cove School, and now we only have administrators there. So I absolutely love our city, is the answer.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Orange County, and my husband grew up in the Midwest. But when our oldest of our 3 children was starting kindergarten, we were looking for a community that was very much like where we grew up, where we went to our neighborhood school and where we knew all our neighbors. And we were so thrilled that we were able to find that in Palos Verdes Estates. Again, that 5-year-old who was starting kindergarten is now 25. And I think when she gets to the point where she's having children, she would love to come back to Palos Verdes Estates here. So it's been a wonderful home for us.
Mr. McGowan?
I did not grow up in Palos Verdes either. I came from a little place called Minnesota, and based upon the weather reports of the last few weeks, we're glad we're out here and not back there. But all kidding aside, I grew up in a community very similar to Palos Verdes Estates, albeit it was a suburb of Minneapolis. It was not on the ocean. And when we got transferred here 23 years ago, we thought we had died and gone to heaven.
Okay. Mr. McCarthy?
I did not grow up in Palos Verdes. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, you Allie?
Get out.
Very similar to this. I moved out here in 1980 to join the Los Angeles Police Department. I got here on a Friday. I started on Monday. I met my wife in 1985. We had an apartment down on the Esplanade, and we used to look up at the hill and see all the sparkling lights and say, hey, one day we want to live up there. And 3 houses later, 21 years ago, we were able to get in when the recession hit. It was actually a good time to buy. Raised my girls here. Great place to live. I treasure the parklands. I love the openness. It's wonderful. New Yorkers come out to visit and they want to come back, and I have to tell them no. But yes, great place to live.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson?
I was actually born in Taiwan and moved to the United States in 1989. My first city was La Cañada, and after being there for about a year, my parents decided that they wanted to get closer to the ocean, but still find a place that has just a tremendous school district, so we moved here. growing up here, it's always quiet and boring, and gosh, I can't wait to get out of here. But after I had children, we knew that this is the best place to be. Again, the school's great. We have one of the safest cities in the country, and also we were voted the #1 place to live in California by USA Today. So what could be, wrong with being here? So I love the city, and this is why I wanted to run and wanted to contribute and wanted to give back to the community that I love so much. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Lozey?
So I did not grow up in Palos Verdes Estates. I grew up in Hollywood Riviera, right down the street. The thing I remember most about Palos Verdes High School, I played basketball in high school, and I remember, I don't know why, 35 or 40 years later, I remember a basketball game at PV High. So that was my best memory there. I actually, my husband and I moved here 10 years ago, and kind of the same reasons as other people said. We were in Manhattan or Redondo Beach, and I remember walking on the Strand and looking up at the hill and thinking, geez, I've traveled the whole world for that view and that feeling. And wow, it was there the whole time. I felt like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And so when we were when our kids were more middle school and high school, we really thought we needed to make a firmer decision on schools, and we looked here first. And then also just when you drive up the hill, you just feel that it's special, and you feel the open space, and you know that makes it a special place, and that's how we landed here.
Okay, next one. I think we have parents with children who are here, and this question is, I am an 8th grader at PV Intermediate School. What are the biggest risks to me and my friends growing up in this community, and what will you do about it? So,
that's a great question.
Ms. King.
Thank you for that question. What are the biggest risks? I guess we do see that on occasion, I think maybe it was Betty who was saying it seemed kind of slow and boring when she was growing up here as a teenager. And when things are slow and boring, teenagers try to find things that are new and exciting. Mm-hmm. And so that is a risk, certainly. We, as a city council, in part tried to address that risk by enacting a social host ordinance, which holds parents responsible for having parties in their home, for serving alcohol to underage students, or providing them with illegal drugs. And so I think that is one of the biggest risks, that you might be influenced by your friends to participate in that. But really, it's the adults here in the room who should be watching out for that. And hopefully through the social host ordinance and through talking with your neighbors and communicating with parents, that will be much less of a risk for you.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan?
I think one of the biggest risks for an 8th grader and his or her parents is the intergenerational transfer of that I project with regards to our finances. This age group is utilizing the assets of our community. We're not putting adequate reserves away to pay for replacement and improvement into the future. And our kids, our grandkids, and our great-grandkids need to look at Palos Verdes Estates in perpetuity. And we need to be providing today for their future. And I think that's where I would put the biggest risk.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
We live in a bubble. Our kids are raised here, and if they go to school here and they do everything on the hill, there's a life out there that's different than this hill. So my wife and I spent a lot of time talking to the girls about what life is like off the hill, which they're going to spend a lot of time. So I think life lessons about what goes on out there versus here, traffic, young drivers, like Jennifer said, drinking. There's a whole bunch of things that you really need to take into account, but really be aware of life other than on the hill.
Ms. Peterson?
I think not just 8th graders or high school kids are dealing with this. I think actually the adults are dealing with this too. Social media. Social media and kindness and how we treat each other is one of the biggest risks I think that we are facing right now. Not just finances, whatnot, because that's different city, different day. But here, I had to actually have conversations with my children saying that, mommy's being attacked on social media for no really good reason. And so we were planning to go to the golf course to have one of these PV Eats with the Mayor. And I said, there might be people that are coming up to mommy and saying not nice things to me, but that who's important to me and whose opinion that I value the most. And that to me is actually one of the biggest risks that we have, because people are not so nice to each other nowadays. And we really need to change that.
Thank you. Ms. Lozey?
Well, I have to say the first thing that popped in my mind when he said, "What's the biggest risk to eighth graders?" Crazy parent drivers. That's the one that pops into my mind. And I think it's also fresh in my mind because I was at a meeting yesterday with people who live near one of the elementary schools, and they no longer have kids in school, but that was a huge concern to them. It's just that, they lived on a street that I think because of the cycle of the drop-off, their street became the one that people were kind of whipping down and turning around and heading the other way to get their kids dropped off on the wrong side of the road. I live near PVIS, and I see all kinds of crazy things, including sometimes people almost running over their own kid. So, slow down. But I do think that is an issue for our police, in all seriousness. I think that's something that we probably need to do a little bit better job of asking our police to monitor around the schools, because I think that's a big risk area.
Thank you. Mr. Camps?
I'm going to camp on to a couple of the other issues and add the first one that came to my head. I'm in technology, and so by default, I say, we're isolated already on the Hill, and there's pluses and minuses to that. But what contributes to that isolation is our kids' use of technology, in particular texting and withdrawing and being in their holes, if you will. And I think, Betty made some comments about, being kind to each other, et cetera, and I'll add to that. I think it's easier to hide behind the technology, and it's easier to withdraw and not be as social. And so I'd like to see the community having offerings. We really don't have a single park in our city. And I realize that we have financial challenges and affordability issues, but it would be nice to see either the city or the school district somehow come together, GoFundMe, do something to pull kids out of their texting holes and into playgrounds.
Thank you. Since we're talking about social media, we have a question about that. It says, given the challenge of dialogues on social media sites, what is the best way council should communicate their message? And we begin with Mr. McCarthy, I believe.
I think it's.
Do I have it wrong?
McGowan, I think.
Mr. McGowan,
Can you
sorry.
repeat the question?
Sure.
Please.
Given the challenge of dialogues on social media sites, what is the best way council should communicate their message?
Well, I think the council needs to do more town meetings. I think we've got a lot of issues within our city that we need to have some town hall get-togethers, and we need to lay out in a complete open book manner the competing resources and competing items that we need to fund with those resources. And it's best, in my mind, I'm maybe old school in the fact that I like to meet with people one-on-one or in groups such as this, rather than to try to take a distorted snippet out of a Twitter or a text message, which many times gets misconstrued, and you many times also don't know who the author is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGowan.
Okay, I'm McCarthy, but I'll go.
We're
Mr.
close.
McCarthy, yeah, right.
don't have to
You
stop
both
my
begin
clock.
with MC, so,
Switch seats.
sorry.
So I agree with Dave on a lot of that, but I think we need a social media component. We have a lot of young residents and kids we want to get the message out to, so I think we need to tap all those social media things, the Twitter, the Snapchat, the Facebook, the EIEIO, whatever's out there. I think we need to tap all those resources to get the message out.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Peterson.
So the best way to communicate with, there's depending on what demographics we're talking about, right? So I know there are people that are so used to getting newsletters and they're not anymore because we're only doing newsletters once a quarter. So we need to keep that going. There's definitely a social media component of this, but the city is now